Thank you so much for being back with us here today, Dr. Andrea.
It's such an honor. Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah, I know. I think we've been doing this for, gosh, a number of years now. It's always great to reconnect.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I love that we're talking about self-love today and codependency. I know self-love is a big topic of yours, and it's interesting. You are a medical doctor and you also help people with self-love. So how did that come to be? How did you get passionate about this?
Well, it started right at the beginning of my medical career 20 years ago, which is crazy to even say. But I was running an intensive outpatient treatment program for people with binge eating disorder and addictions. And one of the things that was interesting is we set up this interdisciplinary wellness center. So we had psychiatry, we had cognitive behavioral therapy, and nutrition, and a fitness gym, and even a holistic spa. And what was interesting is when we had this perfect environment, most of our clients would like get better. They would figure out, what led them into their addiction, and they'd get it under control, especially with the acupuncture, and they'd fly. But there was this subset of those patients that would either sabotage or switch to a new addiction. And as we started to really dig underneath to find out what was going on, I discovered that it was a lack of self-love, that there was this fundamental feeling of unworthiness, as if they didn't deserve to be happy, they didn't deserve to be healthy, they didn't value their own lives. And once I realized that, I really started to work harder on understanding the trauma model and went and got additional training in that. And ultimately, I found that also in other health problems, not just addiction, but people with autoimmune conditions or some of these weird idiopathic things like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, many of these people had the same thing. If they didn't fundamentally love themselves, you could see that there were these flare-ups, or anytime they got into sort of a toxic shame spiral. And that's what led me to really become passionate about helping people discover their authentic self, which, as you know, your true self is totally lovable. There's no need to prove it to anyone. And when we can help people reconnect to that, their healing and recovery process goes much smoother.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it is fun to hear your journey of how it came to be. And I love that you have such a holistic approach. There's so many different things that you cover. So let's talk about adverse childhood experiences, developmental trauma. How do those two things link up with the development of codependency?
Great question. So codependency, I'm so grateful that you're hosting this summit because it's always a hot topic for people feeling like, but I'm compassionate. Of course I care about others, and I want to give, or I'm really invested in knowing what my beloved is thinking about me, about us. But what we know is that caring and compassion and being enmeshed or entangled actually exists on a spectrum. And on the extreme end is the codependency edge. And what we now know is that for most of us, we take on some of these codependent behaviors in response to how we were raised. So it doesn't always have to be trauma. It could be other adverse childhood experiences. So back when I was just finishing medical school in 1998, there were these two doctors who teamed up with the CDC, and they published this big study called the ACEs study. And ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. And they looked at over 15,000 case studies and found that if you looked at these adults, the people who had poor health, so everything from allergies, asthma, Alzheimer's, arthritis, to depression, diabetes, even cancer, if they had in their childhood, so before the age of 18, if they had experienced abuse, that could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, if they experienced neglect, or if they just grew up in a household where a parent was alcoholic, or a parent or someone in the home was emotionally ill, whether diagnosed or not, or if they experienced loss, that could be loss through divorce or loss of a parent due to death or suicide in the family. So this list of these 10, there are more that have been recently added, but these 10 characteristics of adverse childhood experiences predict an increased risk of developing health problems. But what most people are not putting together is the other coping mechanisms that we take on. So if we grow up in a traumatized environment, many of my patients would tell me, oh, I can read a room. I can walk in and just in a blink of an eye, I can tell who the good people are, who the safe people are, who the other toxic people are. Because we learn to adapt. We learn to heighten our senses, either because they got tweaked by trauma and our entire nervous system is tweaked, or it was for our survival. We really find that it's very common to think, okay, dad's coming home, I've got to read his energy just by the way he walks, the way he speaks, the way he smells, or mom, I can tell, is this going to be a night that I'm going to get a beating? Is this going to be a night where I have to look out for them? Maybe they're going to fall asleep on the couch and burn the house down. So we end up taking on these coping strategies. And that's a lot of what codependency is. There are these behaviors and strategies that we do to try to either be safe and survive, or to at least fit in so that we're not ostracized. And so I think that's really important. And certainly in the world of codependency recovery, it's well known. But the reason I'm grateful you're doing this summit is because a lot of people are now hearing about it and they're realizing, oh wait, I have some of those traits. And I want people to make the link between childhood trauma, because there are resources, there are ways that we can heal that trauma, even if your family of origin is dead and gone, even if you think you've worked it out, but you still find yourself in these codependent behaviors that lead to relationship problems, overwork, exhaustion, burnout, you have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also my experience is so many more people are taking a look at this codependency and obviously not just looking at it from the perspective of the origins of the word coming from, right, alcoholic families or families with, drug issues or whatever, and then having, the people that are managing that, right, the non-addicts or the non-alcoholics or whatever. But now it's like it's a much bigger conversation. It's any kind of developmental, right, childhood trauma that we dealt with, whether we had that alcoholic parent or not. I happen to, so I definitely had that experience of like, right, you were talking about reading the room and oh, should I be walking on eggshells, or is this time for me to walk on eggshells or not? And then also, interestingly, right, reading my mom's energy, and she would be really nervous. So I think a lot of it for me was like picking up on what was going on for her, and then kind of modeling, after her. But anyways, so diving into the next question. So can we hear a little bit about your story regarding self-love? You have an interesting story, obviously, of hitting this rock bottom place in burnout, like you mentioned, and lack of self-love. Can you talk a little bit about how you healed from that?
Yeah. So I'm like you. I had some family dysfunction, and for me, I didn't know this until I hit my 30s. But I grew up with this very pervasive sense of not being good enough and not loving myself. I didn't have those words, but I had this feeling of not being good enough. And that started, based on my parents. My mother, with her British upbringing, we always heard at home, children are to be seen, not heard. So me, my brothers and sisters, we were like, it's like, zip it, lock it, don't even speak. Don't touch, don't jump, don't... And so I was very much, silent and always holding myself back until I discovered.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.